Every Sunday at dawn, something extraordinary happens in Meadow Creek. 11 wild horses appear outside St. Matthew's Church, always the same ones, always at the same time. No one leads them, no one feeds them. Yet like clockwork, they arrive through fog and frost, rain or heat, standing silent and still as hymns echo from within. And when the final Amen is spoken, they vanish into the hills without a trace. Locals whisper about miracles. Some say they're a sign from heaven. But Thomas Whitaker, the church's 73-year-old caretaker, knows the truth runs far deeper, wrapped in silence, grief, and one woman's tears. Because every Sunday, from the very last pew, Grace Sullivan watches them. And every time she cries, what secret does she carry? What ties these wild creatures to the darkest moment in Meadow Creek's past? And why is Mayor Collins so desperate to drive them away no matter the cost? Before we go deeper, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if the story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, we'll reveal something you won't want to miss. Back inside the chapel, Thomas's weathered hands tremble slightly as he unlocks the church doors. The morning chill settles into his bones now more than ever. Sunlight pours across the white clapboard walls, gilding the sanctuary in a soft golden hue. He pauses on the steps and looks eastward, toward the ridgeline. They'll be here soon, he murmurs. For most of his life, Thomas believed only in what he could see, touch, or fix. A man of habit, of structure, the perfect caretaker, until the horses came, until everything changed. Inside, he moves through his tasks with quiet purpose, straightening hymnals, adjusting the altar cloth, checking the heat. Through the stained glass, he watches the horizon. Reverend Hayes enters, his footsteps echoing. Cold one today, Thomas says. Won't be long now, the Reverend replies, both of them understanding the weight of that simple sentence. Collins called again, Thomas adds, his voice dry with frustration. Town council's meeting Tuesday. Horses are back on the agenda. He's still blaming them for that boy? Thomas's expression darkens. That kid climbed on the roof himself. The horses didn't move an inch. I know, Thomas, the Reverend says gently, but the mayor needs a scapegoat, and they're an easy target. Their talk is cut short as the door bursts open. Helen Parker, the organist, hurries in. They're coming, she gasps. Everyone's already outside. Thomas steps to the window, heart pounding. Through the mist, 11 figures emerge from the hills. Thunder, the black stallion with the white star, leads the way. Behind him, Esperanza, Spirit, Daisy, Ranger, Willow, Storm, Whisper, Duke, Autumn, and Midnight. Every one of them falls into formation without hesitation, calm, focused, as if guided by something greater. 7:35, exactly on time. A crowd has gathered, locals, visitors, skeptics, and believers. Cameras flash. Thomas scans their faces, some glowing with wonder, others narrowed in suspicion. He sees Sheriff Jim Cooper watching quietly, arms crossed. Beside him, Mayor Collins, frowning, jaw tight. The horses stop just short of the church steps, arranging themselves in a perfect semicircle. Thunder stands at the center, staring into the building as if he sees straight into its soul. They don't move. They don't flinch. They wait. This isn't natural, Collins mutters to the sheriff. They're wild animals. Something's wrong. Someone's going to get hurt. They've been here 2 years, Richard, the sheriff replies, and not once have they caused trouble. That boy fell because he went where he shouldn't have. You know that. The mayor just checks his watch and walks off. Tuesday. It ends. As the congregation begins filing in, Thomas spots her, Grace Sullivan. 82 years old, leaning on her grandson's arm, moving slowly up the path. Her face is tired but glowing in the morning light. Her eyes drift to the horses, and once again, her tears begin to fall. For 2 years now, sorrow has been Grace Sullivan's only companion. And yet, every Sunday morning, she makes her way to St. Matthew's Church, silent, fragile, and faithful. As she nears the front steps, the wild horses await as always. Thunder, the towering black stallion with the white star, turns his head toward her. For a brief, breathless moment, something passes between them, an invisible thread that connects soul to soul. Grace lifts her trembling hand, but she doesn't touch him. Tears silently stream down her lined cheeks. Her grandson, Johnny, gently urges her forward. "Come on, Gran," he whispers. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." Thomas Whitaker opens the church door with a quiet smile. "Morning, Mrs. Sullivan. Morning, Johnny." Grace says nothing. She hasn't spoken since Harold's funeral. Not a word in 2 years. "How's she doing?" Thomas asks gently as Johnny helps her to her usual place in the back pew. "Same," Johnny says, shaking his head. "Doctor says there's nothing physically wrong. She just stopped wanting to talk." He glances back at the horses. "And still, every Sunday, she insists on coming, even though it breaks her." Thomas watches the animals, calm and still in the mist. "Maybe it's not about pain," he says. "Maybe it's about memory." Before Johnny can reply, Reverend Hayes calls the congregation to take their seats. The service is about to begin. As the first hymn fills the sanctuary, Thomas lingers at the back, eyes drawn to the open doors. Outside, the horses haven't moved, not one of them. They never do until the last prayer is spoken. He glances at Grace, eyes shut, tears slipping down her face. His thoughts drift to Harold Sullivan, the strongest man Meadow Creek had ever known. A rancher, a leader, the only man Thomas had seen command 11 horses with nothing but a whisper. Halfway through the sermon, Thomas quietly slips outside. The horses ignore him completely, all except Thunder, who turns his head and meets Thomas's gaze. "What are you trying to tell us?" Thomas whispers. "What did Harold ask of you?" No answer, only silence. And yet, a feeling of understanding passes between them. Loss, loyalty, duty. Since Martha's passing, Thomas has felt adrift. But these horses, they've given him a reason to stay grounded, a mystery that won't let him go. After the final prayer, people begin to trickle out, some stopping in awe, others avoiding eye contact with the animals. Mayor Collins cuts directly through the herd. The horses part without protest, then return to their perfect formation. Thomas notices Ellie Montgomery standing nearby, notebook in hand. As the town's veterinarian, she's been documenting the horses for months. "Any new theories?" Thomas asks. Ellie sighs, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "Nothing that makes scientific sense. Wild horses don't behave like this. Not without training, not with this kind of precision." She glances at her watch. 7:35 arrival, 10:23 departure, like clockwork. Thomas nods. "Same every Sunday." She looks uneasy. "Mayor Collins asked me to speak at the council meeting Tuesday. He wants me to support having them removed." "And what's your opinion?" "Professionally, they're healthy. No signs of aggression. No threat." She pauses. "But personally, I think something beautiful is happening here, and I don't think we should get in the way of it." "I hope you say that out loud," Thomas says. "I'll try." But Collins has already called Frank Miller. The name sends a chill down Thomas's spine. Miller's methods of breaking horses are cruel. These animals deserve more than that. The crowd thins, but Grace still sits in the passenger seat of Johnny's truck, staring at the horses. Johnny chats nearby with Michael Reynolds, the town's high school history teacher. Thomas approaches. "Johnny," he says gently, "think I might speak to your grandmother sometime?" Johnny blinks. "About what?" "The horses and your grandfather." Michael adjusts his glasses. "I've actually been looking into something that might connect all this," he says. "Next month marks 20 years since the Crescent Valley flood," Thomas remembers. 12 lives lost, dozens of homes destroyed, and Harold Sullivan, who rode his horses into the floodwaters to rescue people trapped in the hills. "What does that have to do with now?" Johnny asks. "Maybe nothing," Michael says. "Or maybe everything. The horses started coming here exactly 2 years ago, the week after Harold's funeral." Thomas feels the pieces fall into place. Inside the truck, Grace watches the herd. Her eyes shimmer with emotion, and as if sensing the weight of their stares, Thunder turns his head once more. His eyes meet hers. At that exact moment, the bells of St. Matthew's chime, 10:23. Thunder raises his head and lets out a soft, low nicker. And just like that, the 11 horses turn in unison and walk away, graceful, measured, like spirits returning to the hills. Thomas watches them vanish into the trees. "See you next Sunday," he whispers. That afternoon he sits on his porch. In his hands, an old photo, a younger Harold Sullivan, atop a proud black stallion, the same white star shining on its forehead. Out behind the church, just beyond the hills, Thomas had spotted them, 11 horses, lined up like soldiers, still as stone. Thunder stood at the front, commanding, powerful, unmistakably the leader. And for a moment, Thomas couldn't help but wonder, was this stallion the son of Harold Sullivan's legendary black horse? Before he could dwell on it, the sound of gravel crunching pulled his attention to the driveway. Sheriff Jim Cooper's patrol car rolled to a stop. Jim stepped out, removed his hat, and climbed onto the porch. "Thomas," he said with a tired nod, "just came to let you know. Mayor Collins moved the council meeting. It's happening tomorrow night. He doesn't want to wait." Thomas's heart sank. Why the sudden rush? He's got Frank Miller on standby. Says the horses are unbranded, unclaimed, wandering public roads. Wants them removed as soon as he gets the vote. "They're wild horses, Jim. They don't belong to anyone." "I know," the sheriff said with a sigh. "You know that, but legally? Richard's got a case." He hesitated. "Also, Diane Peterson's been collecting signatures. Says the horses are a distraction during services, causing traffic, churchgoers complaining." "That's not about safety," Thomas muttered. "That's politics. Richard's up for re-election and Diane's his loudest supporter." "Meeting's at 7, Jim said, tipping his hat. "Figured you'd want to be there." After the sheriff left, Thomas sat back down on the porch. He looked again at the old photograph in his hands, Harold Sullivan astride a massive stallion, eyes fierce but reverent. There was something about the way Harold looked at his horses, like he didn't own them, but honored them. The phone rang inside. It was Ellie Montgomery. She didn't even wait for pleasantries. "Thomas, I've been going through old veterinary files. I think I've matched at least 3 of the church horses. They were born on Sullivan Ranch." "You're sure?" "They were Harold's," she said. "But here's the weird part. Based on the records, the oldest one would be nearly 30 now." Thomas went cold. "That's ancient for a horse, especially one living wild." "Exactly. Which means either I've misidentified them, or these are their descendants, 2nd or 3rd generation, following patterns they somehow learned or inherited." Thomas didn't say a word. He just reached for his truck keys. He drove toward the edge of town, past fading fence posts and overgrown fields, to the one place he hadn't been in 2 years, Sullivan Ranch. The farmhouse stood like a ghost against the twilight sky, paint peeling, porch swing swaying gently in the wind. One light glowed from the kitchen. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, steadying himself. He hadn't set foot here since Harold's funeral. As he approached the front door, memories came rushing back. Summer barbecues with Martha, Harold's booming laugh, Grace's legendary apple pie. The door creaked open before he could knock. Johnny Sullivan blinked in surprise. "Mr. Whitaker? What brings you all the way out here?" "I need to speak to your grandmother," Thomas said quietly. "It's about the horses." Johnny hesitated. "She's having a rough night. Maybe tomorrow?" But before he could finish, a sound came from the hallway. Grace Sullivan stood in the shadows, wrapped in a faded blue robe, her white hair loose and flowing over her shoulders. She looked older, frailer than Thomas remembered. But her eyes burned with something fierce. Thomas stepped back. "It's all right. I can come another time." But Grace shook her head, then gestured slowly toward the kitchen. "I guess that means come in," Johnny said, guiding them down the photo-lined hallway. "She might not talk," he added. "She hasn't spoken since Grandpa died." The kitchen was warm. A kettle whistled softly. Grace moved with slow grace, preparing 3 cups of tea. Her hands, though aged, were steady, until she reached for the cookies. Thomas recognized them immediately, Harold's favorites. Johnny spoke gently. "Gran, Mr. Whitaker came to ask about the horses, the ones that come to church." Grace didn't answer, but Thomas noticed her fingers tighten around her cup. "Mrs. Sullivan." "Grace," he began softly. "Tomorrow the council votes on whether to remove them. Frank Miller's ready. If they vote yes, they'll be taken by force." He paused, watching her. "I believe you know why they come every Sunday." I believe Harold had something to do with it. Still, she said nothing. "If there's anything you can tell me that might help protect them, please." Then, with a sharp crack, Grace's teacup shattered in her hand. Scalding tea spilled across the table. "Gran!" Johnny rushed to her side. Blood dripped from her palm where shards had cut into the skin, but Grace didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to notice. She just stared ahead, eyes far away, lost in something none of them could see. Thomas rose but stopped in place, because in that moment, he understood. Something deep was buried within her, and whatever it wasn't just memory. It was truth, and it had been waiting 2 long years to surface. At last, after 2 long years of silence, Grace Sullivan speaks. Her voice is dry, gravelly from disuse, barely more than a whisper. "The flood," she says. "It starts with the flood." Thomas almost misses it. Johnny freezes. "Gran, did you just—" But Grace continues, her eyes distant. 20 years ago? The worst spring rains anyone could remember. Crescent Creek rose 15 feet overnight. Thomas sinks slowly into his chair, barely breathing. After everything, Grace Sullivan is finally breaking her silence. "We were safe up here at the ranch," she says, "but the town wasn't. The emergency sirens failed. People didn't even know they were in danger." She lets Johnny gently bandage her bleeding hand, but keeps speaking, her voice steadier now, as though a dam has cracked open. "Harold heard about the rising water on his ham radio. Woke me up at 2 a.m., already dressed. 'The valley's flooding,' he said. 'People are trapped.' Before I could stop him, he was gone. Out the door, down to the stables." Thomas remembers it too. The blinding rain, the chaos, how fast the water came. "Harold took 11 horses," Grace says. "Our strongest, smartest. He rode Tempest, Thunder's sire, and led the others. He said he could reach the places rescue trucks couldn't." Her voice grows stronger, more resolute. "I begged him to wait, told him daylight would be safer. He just said, 'By then it'll be too late.' And he was right." Johnny stares at her, stunned. "Grandpa never told me any of this." "He wouldn't," she says softly. "Harold never bragged about the good he did." Thomas leans in. "What happened next?" "He rode out into the storm, into the blackness, and I didn't see him again for 2 days," Grace says, eyes shimmering. "When he returned, he was different, quiet, like he'd seen things he couldn't forget, but he'd also done something no one else could have done." She rises slowly, crosses the kitchen, and opens a drawer. From it, she pulls out a worn leather journal. "Harold kept records of everything," she murmurs. She places the journal in front of Thomas, her fingers gently resting on the cover. "That night, he and those horses saved 23 lives. People stranded on rooftops, clinging to trees, stuck in cabins miles from help." Thomas opens the journal. Inside are neatly written entries, rescue routes, names of survivors, faded newspaper clippings, and old photos. Some pages are pressed with handwritten thank you notes, yellowed with time. "When the rescue teams arrived," Grace continues, "they found Harold had already been there, cleared the most remote homes. The horses carried children on their backs, pulled homemade rafts through currents too dangerous for boats." Johnny can barely speak. "He should have been a hero. Why didn't anyone tell the story?" "Because Harold didn't want to be seen as a hero," Grace says. "He always said anyone would have done the same." She takes a sip of fresh tea. Her voice falters. "But there was one place they couldn't reach in time. The old Miller homestead, past Silver Creek. The Gonzalez family lived there. Joseph and Maria. 4 children. Thomas's face darkens. He remembers the tragedy. Grace nods. The bridge was already gone. Harold heard their cries, tried to find another way around. Only Joseph, Maria, and their youngest survived. The kitchen goes still. The weight of that night hangs heavy. Harold blamed himself, Grace whispers. Said if he'd gone faster, taken a different trail, maybe those children would still be here. She turns a page in the journal. A map of Crescent Valley appears, filled with colored lines, rescue paths, landmarks, hand-scribbled notations. After that night, Harold made a promise, Grace says. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, he would ride those same 11 horses to St. Matthew's. He'd pray for the ones he couldn't save, and give thanks for the ones he did. Johnny is stunned. Every single Sunday? For 20 years? Grace nods. Never missed. Not once. I told him God didn't take attendance. But Harold said it wasn't about that. It was about remembering, about honoring the promise. Thomas's eyes widen with sudden realization. And when Harold passed, the horses kept coming, Grace finishes. On their own, no rider, no guide. That first Sunday after the funeral, I looked out the window, and they were already waiting. 11 horses, lined up outside the stable. Harold wasn't there, but they went anyway. Tears slipped down her cheeks. That's why I go to church. Not for the hymns, not for the sermons, to see them, to be near that piece of him that still rides. Johnny squeezes her hand. They're carrying his promise. She nods. When he couldn't anymore, they took over. How could I not bear witness to that kind of faithfulness? Thomas checks his watch. Nearly 9 p.m. The council meeting is less than 24 hours away. Grace, he says softly, will you come? Will you tell this story tomorrow night? To the council? Fear flashes in her eyes. I haven't spoken in public since... I know, Thomas says, gently cutting in, but without your voice, they'll be taken, split up, sold off, and Harold's legacy, it'll vanish. Grace looks out the window. The night has fallen, dark and quiet, but somewhere in the distance, she knows 11 horses are waiting. They were more than animals to Harold, she whispers. They were family. They knew his soul. She closes her eyes, takes a deep breath. I'll come, for Harold, for them. As Thomas turns to leave, Grace suddenly reaches out, her hand grasping his arm with surprising strength. There's something else you should know, she says quietly. Mayor Collins wasn't always against the horses. Thomas turns back, confused. What do you mean? Grace's eyes narrow. Richard Collins was one of the people Harold saved during the flood. Back then, he was just a young deputy, trapped in his patrol car when the creek overflowed. Tempest, Thunder's sire, pulled him free. Minutes later, the car was gone, swept away. Thomas blinks, stunned. Then why is he so desperate to get rid of them now? Her voice turns cold. Because power makes people forget their debts. And Richard Collins has always wanted power more than he's ever cared for truth. The words linger in Thomas's mind like a shadow. Later that night, driving back toward town, Thomas's headlights cut through the darkness. The quiet hum of the truck, the only sound on the lonely Kentucky road. He wonders how many times Harold Sullivan made this same drive, horses trailing behind him, keeping a promise forged in the heart of a flood. As he enters Meadow Creek, the mayor's office is still lit. Thomas pulls over across the street and watches from his truck. Richard Collins steps outside, flanked by Diane Peterson and Frank Miller, the man known for breaking wild horses with brutality, not compassion. The three exchange a firm handshake, then part ways. Thomas grips the steering wheel. Tomorrow's meeting isn't just about safety complaints. It's about erasing a symbol of sacrifice, of memory, of the one man who did what others couldn't. On the way home, Thomas slows as he passes St. Matthew's. The churchyard glows softly in the moonlight, and then he sees them, 11 horses, standing perfectly still before the church steps. At the front, Thunder, Not moving, not grazing, just watching. Thomas pulls over, kills the headlights, and stares. They're never here at night. He blinks, and they're gone. Maybe it was just shadows, or maybe it was something more. Either way, his resolve is unshakable now. Tomorrow he will fight for them, for Harold, for Grace, for the truth. Morning arrives heavy with gray skies. Rain threatens. It feels appropriate. Thomas spends the day flipping through Harold's old journal, marking dates, names, routes, the flood, the rescues, the quiet Sunday rides that continued long after Harold was gone. A knock at the door. It's Ellie Montgomery, the town vet, holding a folder full of photos. "I've been documenting the horses," she says, spreading the pictures across the kitchen table. "Look at this. Every Sunday they arrive in the exact same formation. Same spacing, same leader, same timing. Down to the minute." Thomas studies the images. Could someone have trained them? Maybe, but without a handler? To do this every week for 2 years? She shakes her head. It's not just instinct, it's something more. She slides a newspaper clipping across the table. "I found this buried in the archives, the only article ever written about Harold's role in the flood rescue." A single paragraph. Page 6. Local rancher Harold Sullivan assisted emergency responders. No mention of the lives he saved. No names. No thanks. "Guess who was responsible for media communications back then?" Ellie says. "Deputy Richard Collins." Thomas's jaw tightens. Why would he downplay it? "I have a theory," Ellie says, voice low. "Protocol says the town should have been evacuated hours earlier, but someone delayed the order, and people died." Thomas's eyes go wide. "The Gonzalez children." She nods. "And guess who was running the emergency management office that night?" The name lands like a stone. Richard Collins. If Harold's story comes out, the town will start asking questions. Hard ones. By 6:30 that evening, the parking lot outside the town hall is overflowing. Inside, the air crackles with tension. Thomas arrives with Grace on his arm, Johnny close behind. She walks slowly, but her grip is strong. Harold's journal is clutched to her chest like it's made of glass. On one side of the room, Reverend Hayes, Ellie, Michael Reynolds, dozens of townspeople who've come to protect the horses. On the other side, Diane Peterson and a crowd of worried parents holding signs. "Protect our children, safety first, no more chaos at church." At exactly 7 o'clock, Mayor Collins slams his gavel. "Order. Let's come to order." He speaks like a seasoned politician, measured, practiced, detached. "We're here to address the matter of wild horses loitering near public property, specifically the grounds of St. Matthew's Church." Thomas notices how carefully Collins avoids naming them. No mention of Harold, no acknowledgement of what they mean, just wild horses, like they were strays. Diane Peterson speaks first. Her speech is polished, rehearsed, and designed to stir concern. She claims the horses pose a safety risk, blocking access to the church, creating traffic issues, and being unpredictable around children. She passes around a photo of Thunder rearing, conveniently not mentioning that it happened when a tourist tried to touch him without permission. Frank Miller, the rancher hired to remove the horses, steps forward next. He argues that wild horses don't belong in town and should be rounded up. Some, he suggests, can be auctioned off, the rest relocated. Throughout it all, Grace Sullivan sits still, eyes locked on Mayor Collins. Thomas wonders, will she speak when it counts? Reverend Hayes is the first to defend the horses. He speaks of their peaceful presence and the quiet sense of meaning they bring to the town. Historian Michael Reynolds follows, linking their appearance to the flood 20 years ago. Ellie Montgomery presents her research, showing how the horses behave with remarkable consistency. But Collins keeps interrupting, trying to undermine her credibility. "So you admit there's no scientific explanation?" "There isn't," Ellie replies calmly, "but unexplained doesn't mean dangerous." Then Thomas is called. He stands and tells the room what Grace told him, how Harold Sullivan led these horses into a flood to save 23 lives, how the Sunday ritual began as a vow of remembrance. "These aren't just animals," he says. "They're the descendants of rescue horses, heroes in their own right." He finishes with a request. "I'd like to call a witness, Mrs. Grace Sullivan." A hush falls. After 2 years of silence, Grace rises. Supported by Johnny, she walks slowly to the front, then she speaks. "My husband believed in action over words," she begins, voice quiet but strong. She opens Harold's journal and recounts how he rode out in the middle of a deadly flood with 11 horses, how they carried people from rooftops through waters no boat could reach, how among those rescued was a young deputy named Richard Collins. A ripple passes through the crowd. Mayor Collins stiffens. Grace continues. Harold never asked for credit, but he made a promise. Every Sunday at 7:35, he rode to this church to pray for the ones he saved and the ones he couldn't. She reveals that after Harold's death, the horses came alone. No rider, no guide. Yet still, every week, they return. "They're not just horses," she says. "They're a living promise." Collins tries to deflect. "This is touching," he says, "but it doesn't change the safety issue." Grace cuts in. "You, of all people, should know better." She produces an old letter, one Collins wrote to Harold after the flood. She reads it aloud, his words of eternal gratitude echoing through the room. "You promised you'd never forget." The mayor pales. Grace folds the letter and finishes, "Well, it seems that promise expired." Gasps spread through the crowd. Thomas sees it clearly. Collins's push to remove the horses was never about safety. It was about burying the past. Others speak. Ellie. Maria Gonzalez, the woman who lost 3 children in the flood, rises to say the horses honor their memory. Even Sheriff Cooper offers to implement safety protocols. Ellie volunteers veterinary care. Eventually, Collins concedes. He suggests a compromise, a designated viewing area to protect both people and horses. The council votes, 6-1. The horses stay. As the meeting ends, Grace tells Thomas quietly, "Collins asked me not to share the letter." "And what did you say?" "I told him it depends on how he treats the horses going forward." Thomas smiles. "Political blackmail?" She shrugs. "Insurance."